Good morning, American Lit. Hopefully today the computer will work better for us and we won't freeze. But if that does happen, what you did yesterday is perfect. Just go on your iPad and do the work. It's all set up so you can do it individually as needed. As far as yesterday's lesson goes, I went back and re-recorded it. So those of you who need a little better, stronger start on Walden, that is in there. And of course, at the end of the week, there will be an examples handout in the folder. In other words, your week 8 will have some answers in it in the examples folder for you. So if you get stuck, that's a good place to look. Today, as you can see on the screen, today we get to analyze civil disobedience. This is the essay by Thoreau that really inspired a lot of revolutions and other protests down the line. So other people who believed in these ideas use Thoreau's words, in other words. So long story short, civil disobedience is an essay that gets quoted a lot in other works. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, even Malala from I Am Malala, she talks about civil disobedience. So this is probably Thoreau's second most influential work. The other is Walden, which you read yesterday. Tomorrow, as promised, you're going to get most of the hour for work time. I say most because I'll take a moment or so at the beginning with a couple of tips on how to best raise your grade. So tomorrow is the day, as you know, to get in weeks 1 through 7 at the latest. Anything that's in after 11:59 p.m. won't be graded. But we'll go over that more tomorrow. Next, I want to preview what you're going to write today on your week 8 handout. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that yet, go ahead and open that now. So today we're doing the second part of your formative work for this week, which is your answers should show an understanding of not only transcendentalism, but civil disobedience, and you're going to have at least one text citation, and that should be correct. If you're not sure how to write that, there is an example in this week's slides. Okay, so here's what we did yesterday. So we're on task 3 today. So question 5, grabbing my phone just in case it freezes again, so I can actually see it when Miss Grundy texts me. All right, so describe the background or events in Thoreau's life that led to him writing Civil Disobedience. So we'll talk about that one right at the beginning of the piece. So you should have that answer right away. And notice you can write that in your own words. And to summarize it, number 6, Thoreau gives several arguments for why citizens should reject the ideas of majority rule in government and follow their own conscience against the state. Detail one of his arguments in the space below, or you can cite a line from the text that clearly shows one of his arguments. So he's going to make several arguments about why following what the government says is not the best idea, in his opinion, of course. You get to decide what you think by reading this. Okay, 7. Which of the 3 transcendentalist beliefs do you think is shown most in this essay? State the belief and explain why you think so. And if you blank on the beliefs, remember that's in this week's slides too. You can go back and have a look. So write which belief it is and why you think it is. So either give reasons in your own words or text citation that supports what you think. Here's the part where your text citation is required because we're at the end here. So this is the last thing you need to write today for civil disobedience. So in the space below, write a correct text citation from civil disobedience, either showing a piece of advice, an argument, or one of Thoreau's opinions. Then give your reaction or opinion to what you selected. Now, if I was a student, I was always looking for the least amount of work. I'll be honest, that's the kind of student I was. I would wonder, hey, if I used a text citation earlier for one of these answers, can I use the same one for this one? Absolutely, you can. So the goal here is to see that it's correct. It doesn't have to be original. Okay? So you could reuse one of your text citations from earlier in the work and then just write your reaction or opinion to it. And like I said yesterday, if you aren't sure what to write, like if you get stuck on reaction opinion, write why you picked that particular text citation. Why did it stand out to you? All right, so that's what we're doing right meow. Hopefully, this knock on wood, this will continue to cooperate. I would like to at least give you a start in this essay and especially tell you the background part for your first answer. Like why did he write this? What happened in his life that made him write this? And we talked about this briefly the other day when we talked about Thoreau to start. So long story short, and then I'll read this background where it explains more of this. The reason why Thoreau wrote this essay is because he was sitting in jail. He went to jail for his poll tax. As I mentioned earlier, that was a voting tax. And usually the money from that was used to fund whatever the government was pushing at that time. At that time, it was the Mexican American War. Thoreau thoroughly disagreed with this war. He thought it was imperialism. He thought it was being a bully, frankly, and he wasn't going to pay for it. As I told you, he did come from a wealthy family. They offered to bail him out several times. I'll bail you out. I'll pay for your poll tax. You don't need to sit in jail. He sat in jail because of the principle. He refused to leave jail. He wanted to take a stand. So he wanted to show the government how annoyed he was, in other words. So that tells you Thoreau is a person who not only says what he believes, but then backs it up. All right, so let's read the textbook's version of what I just said. But the long story short is what happened in his life to get him to write this? He sat in jail because of his beliefs. All right, so background. Thoreau put into practice the ideas expressed in Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance. In 1846, he spent a night in jail for refusing to pay a poll tax, a tax one had to pay in order to vote, as an act of protest against the U.S. government. Thoreau was enraged by the government's support of slavery and its war against Mexico, which he viewed as a case of a stronger country overpowering a weaker one simply to expand its own borders. Inspired by his experience in jail, Thoreau wrote this essay to add his voice to the ongoing debate about a citizen's responsibility to pay for a war he did not support. I should also mention that Thoreau, after sitting in jail, some of the people he got to know while sitting in there, they became lifelong friends. So some of these were people of color. And Thoreau, after this, spent a lot of his writing was specifically on that issue, on how evil slavery is and how evil racism is. All right. So let's see what he says. Enough of me talking. Let's hear his words. I heartily accept the motto, that government is best which governs least, and I should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systemically. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which I also believe. That government is best which governs not at all. And when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have. So Thoreau really believed that by this time, our time, we would have less government. Government is at best but an expedient. But most governments are usually, and all the governments are sometimes, inexpedient. Expedient means able to solve problems efficiently, useful. The objections which have been brought against a standing army, and they are many and weighty and deserve to prevail, may also at last be brought against a standing government. The standing army is only an arm of the standing government. The government itself, which is only the mode which the people have chosen to execute their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people can act through it. Witness the present Mexican War, the work of comparatively a few individuals using the standing government as their tool. For in the outset, the people would not have consented to this measure. But to speak practically and as a citizen, unlike those who call themselves no government men, I ask for not at once no government, but at once a better government. Let every man make known what kind of government would command his respect, and that will be one step toward obtaining it. After all, the practical reason why, when the power is once in the hands of the people, a majority are permitted, and for a long period continue, to rule is not because they are most likely to be in the right, nor because this seems fairest to the minority, but because they are physically the strongest. A government in which the majority rule in all cases cannot be based on justice, even as far as men understand it. So, in other words, he's saying the people who get elected and stay elected aren't necessarily there because they're the best, but because they're the biggest or the strongest. And in our country, typically that means they have the most money to fund their campaign. A government in which okay, I already read that part. Can there not be a government in which majorities do not virtually decide right and wrong, but conscience? In which majorities decide only those questions to which the rule of expediency is applicable? In other words, why do we really need government? Like, what are they useful for? Must the citizen ever for a moment or in the least degree resign his conscience to the legislator? Why has every man a conscience then? I think that we should be men first and subjects afterward. It is not desirable to cultivate a respect for the law so much as for the right. The only obligation which I have a right to assume is to do at any time what I think right. It is truly enough said that a corporation has no conscience, but a corporation of conscientious men is a corporation with a conscience. Law never made men a whit more just, and by means of the respect for it, even the well-disposed are daily made the agents of injustice. So in other words, following the law doesn't necessarily mean you're doing the right thing. And he's saying that, in fact, laws can be harmful. They support people doing the wrong thing. Slavery was legal at this time. A common and natural result of an undue respect for law is that you may see a file of soldiers, colonel, captain, corporal, privates, powder monkeys, and all marching in admirable order over hill and dale to the wars, against their wills, aye, against their common sense and consciences, which makes it very steep marching indeed, and produces a palpitation of the heart. They have no doubt that it is a damnable business in which they are concerned. They are all peaceably inclined. Now, what are they, men at all, or small movable forts and magazines? Magazines means a type of artillery at the service of some unscrupulous man in power? Visit the Navy Yard and behold a Marine, such a man as an American government can make, or such as it can make a man with its black arts, a mere shadow and reminiscence of humanity, a man laid out alive and standing, and already, as one may say, buried under arms with funeral accompaniments, though it may be. Not a drum was heard, not a funeral note. As his course to the rampart we hurried, not a soldier discharged his farewell shot over the grave where our hero we buried. So he's quoting an Irish poet to make his point about when people go to war, they know they're going to die. That's just a part of war. But is it worth it if you're not fighting for the right things? That's what he's saying. The mass of men serve the state thus, not as men mainly, but as machines with their bodies. They are the standing army and the militia, jailers, constables, posse comitatus, etc. In most cases, there is no free exercise whatever of the judgment or of the moral sense, but they put themselves on a level with wood and earth and stones. And wooden men can perhaps be manufactured that will serve the purpose as well. Such command no more respect than men of straw or a lump of dirt. They have the same sort of worth only as horses and dogs. Yet such as these even are commonly esteemed good citizens. Others, as most legislators, politicians, lawyers, ministers, and office holders, serve the state chiefly with their heads, and as they rarely make any moral distinctions, they are as likely to serve the devil, without intending it, as God. A very few, as heroes, patriots, martyrs, reformers in the great sense, and men, serve the state with their consciences also, and so necessarily resist it for the most part, and they are commonly treated as enemies by it. So here in the essays, he's now finally explaining what happens when you don't follow the state. You're considered an enemy. So I'll do a little bit more of this for you, and then you'll continue. Unjust laws exist. Shall we be content to obey them, or shall we endeavor to amend them and obey them until we have succeeded, or shall we transgress them at once? In other words, we're going to have to keep breaking the law if it's not the right law. Men generally under such a government as this think that they ought to wait until they have persuaded the majority to alter them. They think that if they should resist, the remedy will be worse than the evil. But it is the fault of the government itself that the remedy is worse than the evil. It makes it worse. Why is it not more apt to anticipate and provide for reform? Why does it not cherish its wise minority? Why does it cry and resist before it is hurt? Why does it not encourage its citizens to be on the alert, to point out its faults, and do better than it would have them? Why does it always crucify Christ and excommunicate Copernicus and Luther and pronounce Washington and Franklin and even Hamilton rebels? If the injustice is part of the necessary friction of the machine of government, let it go. Let it go. Perchance it will wear smooth. Certainly the machine will wear out. If the injustice has a spring or a pulley or a rope or a crank exclusively for itself, then perhaps you may consider whether the remedy will not be worse than the evil. But if it is of such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say break the law. Let your life be a counter friction to stop the machine. What I have to do is to see at any rate that I do not lend myself to the wrong which I condemn. All right, let you continue reading on what he thinks specifically should happen with the government to end this essay here. And notice they're including in the text here pictures of other movements that were similar to Thoreau's ideas. All right, so you folks have the rest of the time to get this done and to submit week 8 today. And as always, if you have questions, let me know. Go for it.